U.S.-China trade. China's Commerce Ministry this morning is saying that it remains in touch with the United States over the signing of Phase 1 trade deal. This as China announces new tariff waivers for 6 chemical and oil imports from the United States. Joining us right now is Hudson Institute Senior Fellow, Director of the Center for Chinese Strategy, Michael Pillsbury. Michael, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Hi, Maria.
And certainly get your insights on such an important topic. First off, when are you expecting a signage in terms of signing this Phase 1 deal, China and the U.S.?
Well, the president and his advisors have been saying 2 to 3 weeks. There's some technical issues. One is a Chinese translation. The other is some legal issues, which are still important. And the third is who and where will sign this. Remember, the president talked about, and I liked his idea very much, that he and Xi Jinping would go to Iowa together, sort of stand around with farmers and sign it right there to show the benefits very vividly. Maybe have you be right there interviewing him. But that idea is not so well received on the Chinese side. They are still trying, one part of the who and where this will be signed and what is in it, one part of all that is the Chinese reaction. They feel they have been ripped off, that the agreement is very much in President Trump's favor. So they're kind of dragging their feet, in my impression, just from reading their press and talking to Chinese delegations here.
That's very rich, saying that the Chinese have been ripped off.
Yes.
The Chinese have been ripping the U.S. off for decades, actually, in terms of intellectual property. That's interesting that the Chinese would say that.
If it's true, it's a triumph for President Trump.
Yeah.
That he's really got something out of them, especially in the enforcement chapter.
Yeah, but Michael, I mean,
there.
China is throwing everything at us all the time, right? They just adopted new malicious cybersecurity rules. And Gordon Chang writes this: after all of these cybersecurity rules are in place, no foreign company may encrypt data so that it cannot be read by the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, businesses are required to turn over the encryption keys. Can we do anything about the theft of intellectual property? Does this Phase 1 deal really deal with that?
Yes, it does. The Phase 1 deal has not been publicly released. Only the chapter titles have been released. And one of the chapter titles is about forced technology transfer. So if China would try to enforce this law the way that Gordon Chang is talking about, that it would be totally intrusive on all American companies, give us everything now, today, that would be blocked by what the Chinese have agreed to in the first phase deal. So American companies who were asked to do that would simply complain through the enforcement mechanism and would have to be stopped. Larry Kudlow has already said this a couple days ago, that the enforcement mechanism would block this kind of effort. Now, Gordon Chang has a problem that he's been saying China robs us blind anyway with cyber attacks over the last, say, 5 to 10 years. So it's unusual to me that he now wants to say this new law is a terrible thing because it will just do what China's already been doing over the last 5 or 10 years. It's hard to hype the same threat over and over again and then expand it. Gordon's also been writing in a famous book 20 years ago, China will collapse within 5 years, totally and completely.
Yeah.
This is very embarrassing for him.
He did. He said the coming collapse of China.
We can't. The China threat is bad enough without hyping it and making it sound like it's we're all going to die tomorrow.
Michael, you know, this from a financial standpoint, I mean, the markets have loved the announcement of this deal.
Yes.
Also, as a political matter, it looks like this is a big coup for the president. I saw the president a couple of days ago in the Oval Office with my friend Art Laffer, and we talked about this, and I asked him the question, what happens if China does not comply with this deal? And he said, look, we will come back with the tariffs. Do you think that is, I mean, because, you know, Marie, you asked exactly the right question.
Yeah.
They will sign a document. It's how do you get them to enforce it?
That's
and
right.
Is the tariffs the only way?
No, the president has other measures.
Right.
I think the administration has used the word snapback.
Yeah, Larry Kudlow used that on Fox Business yesterday.
So, in other words, the tariffs could snap back into place should they not follow in on their promises.
Ambassador Lighthizer laid out how the enforcement mechanism will work back in his congressional testimony in February and in June. That there's a kind of appeals process. It's a court adjudication. And the crucial thing is, the trade agreement has to come across in the Chinese language as legally binding, that either our government or private companies can sue China for enforcement. It's not just a statement of good intentions.
Okay. Let me ask you this. This is a story I've been working on now for the last couple of weeks, and this is about the Thrift Savings Fund. This is the Thrift Savings Board, federal retirement fund, basically. It's $500 billion, more than $500 billion in assets under management. And basically is the 401k money for military past and present, government employees. The government matches your money just like any other 401k, and you're talking about $500 billion. But now there is a movement to push 10% of those assets to mirror the MSCI index. Now, we know that, so 10% of those assets, what, $50 to $60 billion, is going to mirror the MSCI index. The MSCI index is home to Chinese companies, some of which are sanctioned by the United States. So we can't even do business with these companies, but we're going to have our military investing in them. And just to be clear, these companies are companies that make submarines, fighter jets, the technology that is used in the concentration camps that are holding the Uyghurs. You got to explain this one to me, because this is a head scratcher that the government, the U.S. government, wants this thrift fund to invest in Chinese companies, even though they're sanctioned, and they're building equipment to beat America.
No, it looks very bad. It raises the issue of whether President Trump should, as a weapon against the Chinese, to get more leverage on them, should he start interfering in capital flows?
That would be a huge thing for Wall Street.
It would upset some on Wall Street.
Oh, yeah.
The Chinese, I think, may have agreed to the first phase in part because the White House has already been talking with the media about the possibility of interfering with capital flows. There's legislation on this already. Marco Rubio and others want to block.
He wants to block it, right?
Yes.
But I mean, the problem
bigger issue is whether or not the waiver that President Obama put in 2013 should be canceled. This waiver allows Chinese companies 150 or more, $1.1 trillion on our three main markets in New York, allows them to suppress any accounting problem and not make it public to either investors or the SEC.
Well, and that's spot on. That's what the issue is. There's no disclosure here, Steve. We don't even, the investors who want to invest in the MSCI, they don't understand, or some of them, that these companies don't follow Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yeah,
these companies don't have to report.
I don't want my 401k money in these accounts.
Exactly.
Right.
So then why is the Thrift Board doing this?
In theory, as I say, they can change, or the president can get them to change. But in theory, when you change the mix in the index, they're just by normal fiduciary practices. They're supposed to invest where everything is set as a good investment. So when the MCI itself decided to add Chinese stocks as part of the index number, that automatically makes this happen unless it's blocked by the president. I myself am against this. I think also this waiver idea that President Obama did in 2013, I think it probably should be canceled, but it should be part of the trade talks where the Chinese see we need to make more concessions to President Trump, or we're going to get hurt really badly.
Yeah, well, I mean, at this point, we'll wait for a resolution here. You're going to expect it in about a month? Are we going to hear what happens here? Because most people don't, I mean, investors want to see growth, Steve. They want growth, and they know China's economy is growing 6%, or at least that's what they tell us. But they don't necessarily understand, I don't think, civil-military fusion. You want to explain that real quick?
The Chinese take the financing we provide and do, as you mentioned, put it into state-owned enterprises and military construction. So we are essentially funding not only Chinese military, but even the South China Sea, the company that did all the dredging, that's a state-owned company. It gets capital from the U.S.
Yeah.
So whether to go into all this, it's another step beyond just tariffs and saying to the Chinese, please follow, what your promises are. Please obey the WTO rules. It's another step. It may have to be taken, and we'll find out, I think, if they start cheating on the first phase agreement as early as, let's say, February, March, April, then the president may be asking for more leverage. He may ask his staff. He may ask Steve, what can we do to get some more leverage on China? This is not being implemented properly.
Well, impacting the capital markets is a big deal, Steve, and I think that if we were to see a change in terms of not being able to invest in these Chinese companies, market would react.
Oh, I think you're exactly right. It would react negatively.
Yeah, huge. Negatively, right. Michael, it's always a pleasure to get your insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. I'm trying not to be scary, We should be optimistic about the president's new deal.
You're optimistic about the Phase 1 deal.
Yes, I am.
And you think we'll get a Phase 2?
Yes, I do.
When does that come?
Phase 2 involves the subsidies, and this is where the Chinese are very secretive.
They don't want to give those up, though.
The Chinese don't even tell us where the subsidies are, so it's hard for us to penalize them if we're not quite sure who's being subsidized to do what. So to some degree, the president's genius in all this, he's been getting the Chinese to reform themselves by holding up the punishment they're going to suffer if they don't.
Yeah, well, it's great to hear you optimistic, by the way. This is a big deal. Michael Pillsbury, optimistic on the U.S.-China relationship. Great book, by the way. I'm still reading it, and I love it, Michael. Thank you. Michael Pillsbury joining us.